Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a few moments. Hello, everyone, and welcome to ALM Success Stories by CoreALM. In a moment, I'm going to introduce today's speaker, Steve Oken. We're just going to give everyone one more minute to join the call. Okay, Steve, are you ready to go?
I sure am. Hello.
Okay, so everyone, here we go. I'll just start by welcoming everyone to today's call. We know that you are very busy and we appreciate the time you are investing with us. I'm very excited to welcome you all to our live coverage of the SAP Summit in Mannheim, Germany, where CoreALM is a gold sponsor. I'd also like to introduce today's speaker, Steve Oken, who recently joined CoreALM as president. Steve has over 2 decades of experience leading business transformation projects, and we're very excited to have him on our team. Steve, we should probably let our audience know that you started the relationship with CoreALM as a customer. Is that correct?
Absolutely, that's totally true. In fact, the last 4 years, I was a customer of CoreALM and used CoreALM's services and software to help to ensure success for my clients' projects and when I was doing SAP business transformation projects.
That's great. So Steve, how are things going in Germany?
Anna, it's been an amazing show so far. We're about halfway through day 3 at this point, 1 more day to go, and it has been action-packed. So had so many great conversations with customers, partners, and of course the experts from SAP. There's really a lot of exciting developments, and we're really happy that we get to share some of the news with our audience here today. So thank you very much for joining.
Okay, great. Well, then I will turn it over to you and you can go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Wanda. I'll probably switch off video just so that I can maximize the value of the screen here, but I'll come back on later. So again, I wanted to welcome everyone and thank you for fitting us into your schedules. And I'm going to start with a quick intro to CoreALM. Many of you actually, have worked with us before or, have known us for a long time. But just in case, there's, people that are, meeting us for the first time, I wanted to go back to the origin story a little bit. And CoreALM was started by our founder and CEO, Labanat Bertucci. And prior to joining CoreALM, Labanat spent 6 years at SAP, and he had various titles there. But the last, one of the main titles that responsibilities that he had was as the Application Lifecycle Management and Solution Manager Global Practice Lead. And so 12 years ago, he left SAP to start CoreALM. And as you can see from the small selection of logos at the bottom of the page, he has successfully led our team through the implementation of Solution Manager for some of SAP's largest customers. But in reality, in our experience, SAP's customers don't only support SAP. They also have other applications that they support, and for those other applications, they use other tools such as Jira, Azure DevOps, ServiceNow. And it's for this reason, in 2018, that CoreALM started introducing connectors to applications like Integration Solution Manager, Jira, ServiceNow, and Azure DevOps, so that they could connect and work together. So as we talked about, I recently joined the team, but I was a customer for 4 years, and I've really seen the benefits of what the best practices for an application lifecycle management solution can provide. And really, that's why I joined the team. So I'm very excited to be able to share with you some of our company's success stories here today. So let's get into it. I've seen a lot of these kinds of presentations, and I always come in, I've often got 3 kinds of questions that go through my mind during a presentation like this. The first one's pretty easy. Why listen? Why do I need to sit down and spend my time on this? And we'll come back and look at the answers. I hope to be able to answer all 3 of these questions for you. At least you're here today, so you've agreed to listen. Thank you for that. If you get past that, or if I get past that, I tend to go to the next question on my list, which is, why do I care about this? What is it about this that is interesting to me that I need to know about? And it's not always that I get past the second question to that third question. But if I do, it's usually because the presenter is talking about a topic that really interests me. Then I might get to that third question, which is, why change? And in other words, a presentation really doesn't have any real impact on someone unless they're willing to do something different in their own lives, in their own way of doing business, and taking action in some way. And it could be a big change, or it could be just a small change, something as easy as, I'm going to do a little bit more research on this topic and look into it further. Or it could be a bigger change, where they've agreed to, take on a whole different approach to the way they've been doing business in the past. But those are the 3 questions that I always try to get through with these types of presentations. So let's just go and focus on question 1 first for one moment. Why listen? So what is it that makes us open to listening to a presentation like this? It's usually because I have a problem that I'd like to solve. Okay, well, let's talk about the kinds of problems that somebody might have when it comes to, an Agile DevOps solution for SAP. Well, first, let's take a look at what a holistic ALM process includes. There's usually 2 sides to it, implementation and operations. And implementation is usually, big changes, SAP projects where you're implementing a whole new, maybe you're doing an S4 transformation or a major upgrade or a new feature implementation. And those are usually very large projects. They involve design, build, test, and release. And then you have the operations side of things. On that side, you have, just the ongoing support and maintenance. They still may have sizable changes that are going through that kind of a process. But it usually involves things like detecting issues, correcting issues, and managing the release of those smaller changes through the environments safely. So what are some of the common problems that you have in each of those different areas? Let's take a look. So I'm not going to tell you, problems I've had. I'm going to talk in the voice from our customers and the kinds of problems that we hear from our customers all the time. And then we're going to drill into a few of these. So one question that we get asked all the time is, hey, I'm an Agile company. Why is it that we can't run Agile for our SAP projects? So that's one question. Another is, how can I plan work for teams that are running on different timelines? And that's a challenging one. We're gonna get into that one some more. And then the third one is, how can I prevent SAP integration defects from causing costly delays to my project timeline? Okay, I don't know too many projects that haven't at least felt the pain of this type of thing if they're doing a big SAP implementation. So it's a very common problem that needs to get solved. On the operations side, we hear questions, they're a little different, but we hear questions like, why can't I use one consistent workflow to manage changes to all SAP and non-SAP applications? We also hear a question like, how can I use one set of tools to monitor issues that are being reported by my SAP and non-SAP applications all into one place? Okay, so those are some questions that we get asked. Let's go back to the three questions that I raised earlier. The first one being, why listen? And as I said, usually it's because there's a problem that that resonates with us that we want to hear more about, because it's a problem that we have as well. And I hope at this stage, with the problems that I've listed so far, that at least I've piqued your curiosity and that you're maybe curious enough to continue to listen. Honestly, if not, you're free to leave and I'll save you the time. But we are going to be drilling into these questions in a little bit more detail. And, so if you're still here, that's great. Let's go on to question number 2, why care? Usually the answer to why care comes with a belief that maybe a solution is available, a solution to a problem that we care about. And so let's talk about solutions. Now, with CoreALM, we always focus on SAP implementations. And so generally, when it's an ALM solution that needs to be brought to the table, we're going to be dealing with SAP Solution Manager and or Cloud ALM. So that's a given. And when it comes to those components, from a services perspective, we can cover any aspects of work that you need help with on your side. So those are the types of things that we can do from a services perspective. Full coverage, whether it's implementation, operations, whatever area you want to get into, we can do it. From a connectors perspective, we can connect to applications like Jira, Azure DevOps, and ServiceNow, which are common to help manage the ALM process for non-SAP applications. And we also have an add-on, which is an Agile Scrum board that allows you to visualize the changes in your as you're going through your projects, to keep track of where you are in one place and focus on the work and give visibility to your teams. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So those are the solutions that we bring to the table. But I think to really bring it home, it's important to actually bring it to life with some actual case studies from our customers. Okay, so let's talk about this first case study. So this is a company that is very, very large, a global e-commerce company. They were implementing S4 across 5 countries. They wanted to use a standard template with a very, very broad scope. This is a large company that earns $14 billion a year and has 10,000 plus employees. And actually, this story goes back to the time before I worked at CoreALM, and the customer actually called me because they wanted me and my team to come in and do an assessment of a project that they had underway. And at the time, they were trying to use an Agile methodology to implement SAP. And so the question they asked me is, okay, well, how do you feel about this? We're running an SAP project, we're using an Agile methodology, and so we're starting our build before we've really completed our design. And I told them that if they kept going down that path, they would likely not be able to keep to their timeline or budget, and they probably wouldn't be happy with the result of that, because SAP projects are very expensive to operate. You have a large team, costs a lot of money, and the extra time is generally not acceptable from a timeline or from a budget perspective. And so I really advised them against that. 6 months later, they called me back to say that they weren't able to keep on track with their project timeline or their budget, and they asked if me and my team could come in to help. So I said that we could, and that as long as they were willing to adopt a more standard methodology for implementing SAP, something like SAP Activate, which has Agile elements to it, but that follows a more rigorous path. And they agreed. And so after my team was engaged, they explained to us the next question. And by the way, in bringing that team together, that's when I first brought CoreALM to the table. It's probably one of my earliest exposures to CoreALM. And the next question they asked us together was, okay, so Agile teams, we have Agile teams that use Jira, and they're going to continue to use Jira because they've developed a process that is we consider to be the best practice. But how can we keep them in sync with what's happening on the SAP project team, especially when it comes to integration testing? And that was a great question, which took us some time to really work through a solution for that. So let me paint a bit of a picture here to explain that a bit further. At the bottom here, you can see this is like 10 sprints that are, the Agile teams would be doing, just to give you a bit of a timeline example. So that's a 20-week period of time, 10 two-week sprints for the Agile teams. But for SAP teams, there's really not very much you can do within SAP to make a significant amount of change in a 2-week sprint, let alone testing that change and documenting that change and going through the full sprint process. So generally, Agile teams or build teams for SAP tend to run in longer sprint cycles. Could be 4 weeks or 5 weeks. In this case, we kind of agreed on a 5-week sprint cadence. And so what you can see is those sprints really don't line up. You have 4 sprints for the SAP team and you have 10 sprints for the same time period for the Agile teams. But at some point, you got to get those teams together to test integrations. So how do you plan that? So what we ended up doing is we kind of, by examining the dependencies, we came up with a list of milestone dates for each of the integrations. So for every application that SAP needed to integrate with, we created a milestone for that, and we set that milestone into the calendar. And then what we could look at is which sprint is the latest sprint by which both teams need to complete their work in order to protect that milestone date. So you can see in this case, the milestone is really, to be integration tested by sprint 2 for the SAP team and sprint 4 for the Agile teams. So the SAP team has to complete all their unit testing and development by the end of sprint 1, and the Agile team has to complete by sprint 3, and then we could keep to the milestone. So all that information was stored in different systems. The SAP team stored all of their information as to what this was. This is just one interface example, but every interface had to have its own details, and all that planning information was stored inside of Focus Build in Solution Manager. The Agile team's information was stored in Jira, and like I said, they weren't going to change that. So we could take all that information, we could load it into those respective tools at one point in time. But in reality, we all know from doing these types of projects that it's not a one-time thing, that changes happen and that sometimes you actually need to move interim milestones in order to achieve an end result on the project based on changes that happen. And of course, the teams also need visibility to what's happening in each of the other teams on the other side, so they would be able to coordinate their work. So how did we solve this problem? Well, we used the Focus Build connector for Jira, which allowed us to connect Focus Build and Jira together. And so all the information that was stored in both of those systems was immediately exchanged in real time to the other system. So if there was a milestone or a sprint date that was missed, there was a dependency for work that was happening across the other team, they would have immediate visibility to that, and all that information would be synchronized back and forth. So that was the first thing. On the SAP side, they also wanted a way to visualize all of that on a Scrum board, and they were using Focus Build, and so they chose to use our Scrum board for Focus Build to have that visual report of status and exactly where they were at any point in time. So that's really how we were able to get those teams working on different timelines to really stay in sync and have one version of the truth across both of those 2 different reporting systems without having to get people to change the tools that they were using. So let's just do a quick recap on the solutions that were deployed to solve these problems for this customer. First, they used our services. In fact, obviously they had solution manager services. They also used our Scrum Masters for this project. Scrum Masters helped to keep the cadence and the integration between the SAP teams and the non-SAP teams in sync. Optional, obviously, but certainly a service that our customers were happy to take advantage of in this case. They also use that focus build connector for Jira in order to keep things in sync there, and the Scrum board for focus build. Okay, so that's example number one. Let's go to number two. So this is a global IT company, very, very large company. This is an even bigger scale of project. This company actually had a hard deadline by which time they needed to implement S4, and that was because they were splitting off from a parent company, and they were no longer going to have support on their previous systems, and they had a hard deadline to get off the previous systems and on to a new implementation of S4, greenfield implementation. So what was the problem that they had? This is an interesting case. What they said is, okay, we have testers who understand the overall features, and then they have test cases that, they've got a list of test cases that they need to implement, but they really don't fully understand which test cases match to each of the features that they have in the system. And so they don't know how to validate that those features are being implemented correctly. And so we took a look at their situation, the way they were set up. They had a very robust process to approve features in Azure DevOps. And those features were really controlled tightly because those features represented the scope of the project, and that needed to be given the timeline pressures, that needed to be very tightly controlled. Whereas because they were using Solution Manager and Focus Build, all of their test cases were being stored inside of SAP Focus Build. So the information was in two different places, two different tools. So what did we do to solve this? So first, we had to go through and analyze the test cases and create a map of each of those test cases to the features that they had in Azure DevOps. And that took a bit of time. It was a bit of a manual effort, but we were able to go through and map all of those test cases and build that mapping in, and we stored the mapping information in both of those systems, so they were kind of cross-linked between those two systems. But of course, again, there's changes all the time. The features there would be an approval process, the feature would change, and a test case would need to be updated. And so they used the Focus Build connector for Azure DevOps to get that job done. With that process and the mapping in place, anytime there was a change, it was clear through the mapping what needed to be updated, and the connector would provide those changes, and they would be updated in real time, backwards and forwards between those two systems. So you had one version of the truth. Okay. So let's just summarize again. In this case, they did use a bunch of our services. We helped coordinate the testing. We helped them on release management and to set up Solution Manager in the first place and keep it up and running in the way that they needed. And they used the Focus Build connector for Azure DevOps. Okay, so let's go to our third example, and I'd love to keep talking about these stories all day long, but I got to get back to the show. So I have time for one more today, and we've got lots more of these stories that we can tell you about, but this one's fun as well. This is a company, slightly smaller scale implementation, but certainly a manufacturing company that had a pressing need to get SAP up and running. What did they have as a challenge? So they realized that in the middle of their SAP implementation, they didn't really have a way that they were going to manage changes to that SAP environment, as well as to control other applications in their landscape, efficiently. And so they went off and they did a search, and they made a decision that they were going to, acquire ServiceNow. And they were going to use ServiceNow to manage all their operational changes, their release management changes after SAP was implemented. And so they, that decision was made, but what they wanted was to have one ServiceNow approval workflow that they could use to manage changes for SAP and non-SAP changes. So how could they have one tool to manage both? That was their question. So let's take a look at, what that looks like. So here's an example. At the bottom here, you'll see ServiceNow and what is probably a pretty standard, typical change process. I can't remember if they went fully out of the box or not, but our system is quite configurable from that perspective. So they had a process for change workflow within ServiceNow. And then on the charm side of things in Solution Manager, obviously, Solution Manager has its own set of workflows, its own set of stages that need to be progressed through in order to promote that change inside of SAP and to release it to production. But they didn't want to have two disconnected flows. They wanted to have an integrated flow. So we spent time designing what an integrated flow would look like. And so you can see with these arrows, the way that things would connect. And the idea would be that when you get to a certain point in ServiceNow, you would actually move the ball over to the charm side, and charm would continue until it reached a certain stage, and then it would come back to ServiceNow, and so on, back and forth, until you exhausted every step. But the point that's very important is it needed to block progress so that you wouldn't go past any of those gates until all of the circumstances were correct on both sides. And so that's really one integrated flow. And so to do that, they used the charm connector for ServiceNow, and we configured, their specific use case for how they wanted operational changes to be approved, both in charm and in ServiceNow, and that's what they're using to this day. So that's really the example, just a summary. We did use our services to implement Solution Manager for them. That's not always necessary, by the way. Depends on what's going on. But they also used our charm connector for ServiceNow. We can get those up and running pretty quickly if customers already have charm and ServiceNow in place. But in this case, that's what they were looking for. So I really want to just, at this stage, we've talked about 3 exciting customer stories. Again, lots more that we'd love to share, but I want to give you an overall view of what our best practice solutions includes. And I call them best practice solutions because there are softwares, but it's about how you use it as well, because every tool has a certain amount of limitations. We have best practices as to how to get the most value out of those tools and how to make sure that you keep your projects on track, whether it's an implementation project or operational update. So we look at the 2 sides, and I'm going to go back to, our focus has been in the past on Solution Manager. And so, like I said, we built those connectors. Let's look at Jira first. So Jira has full coverage across implementation for design, build, test, release management, as well as on the operational side. We can, use ITSM to report and detect and correct defects and keep track of all of those things inside of Jira with integrations to SAP Solution Manager. As well, we can control the release of changes directly from Jira back into Charm for Solution Manager customers. Okay, the next connector is Azure DevOps. Pretty much the same scope. We haven't had a customer yet who needed the ITSM capabilities in the Azure DevOps environment. So we haven't crossed that bridge yet, but I'm sure that'll come one day as well. And on the ServiceNow side, they tend to, our customers that use ServiceNow tend to use it more on the operational side of things. We haven't encountered it on the implementation side, but we do have full coverage for detect, correct, for all the ITSM, as well as for all the release management capabilities that you require from a solution manager perspective. All those integrations are available. On Solution Manager, we also have the Agile Scrum Board, as I mentioned earlier, available as well. But what's exciting, and of course, you've been spending the last 3 days at the conference, if you're at the conference, hearing about the Cloud ALM connectors. Maybe for some people this is pretty new. We're very excited to be able to introduce what we have from an support for Cloud ALM as well. And so all of this is new to the world, but we have active engagements in this space right now on the Jira side to implement this Jira connector for Cloud ALM. And that covers the implementation side of things, all of your task management, project management type things. And we also have the ability to release transports directly from Jira using the features in Cloud ALM. We can also detect and correct using the notifications, the events coming from Cloud ALM and loading those into Jira. For Azure DevOps, same coverage for the project scope, and I haven't yet crossed the bridge of the detect and correct, as I mentioned before. So it really matches what we have on the solution manager side today from a coverage perspective there. ServiceNow, we do have the ITSM, the event style. It's not really ITSM, I guess, the event style notifications coming into ServiceNow from Cloud ALM. That connection is available. And then we have taken our Agile Scrum board and adapted it for Cloud ALM, so that add-on is available on the Cloud ALM side as well. One more exciting announcement is that for anybody who is interested to take advantage of our Scrum board, because we really think that we use it internally, all of our internal developments we manage on it, so we can't imagine living without it. If you're one of those people that wants to learn more about what it can do and and see if it's a fit for you, I'm excited to announce that we now have a free tier available for the focused build add-on of the Agile Scrum board for Solution Manager. So it's literally free. You install it, you can get up and running very quickly, and you can have access. You can manage your work items, work packages, use all the visualizations, reporting, and there are some limits in the features, but you can do quite a lot with that new tool. So those are our updates for today. But I want to go back and check in on how we did on those 3 questions. We got past why listen, you're still here. Why care? Well, I hope at least after hearing what potential solutions we might be able to bring to you, that you're at least interested. So if that's true, let's keep going and look at the 3rd question on this list, which is really that tough one that I mentioned before, which is really, why change? And I've had to face this in the past, and in my experience, the only reason why I'm going to change something that I'm doing because of the fact that I heard something in a presentation is usually because I'm a busy guy, like I'm sure you all are. It's usually because the cost of failure is just too high. And if you're in that situation, we'd like to be able to help you, because it doesn't have to be very hard. I think if you're here, you probably already have the vision for what it is that needs to be done. You've already envisioned this change, and we have tools and we have experiences that we can bring to the table to help you. So hopefully that leaves you a little bit motivated. This has been great. I really appreciate that you spent the time here with us today. Thanks for listening. I'd love to hear your problems, by the way. This isn't all about us saying the great things that we can do. We like hearing these problems. We are curious about puzzles and solving issues. And so on the next page, I'm going to give you access to my LinkedIn page directly. Just point your camera at that and scan that. This should take you to my LinkedIn page, and you can connect with me and just let me know what you think. What are some of the problems you're wrestling with? And we can have an offline conversation. Thanks again for taking the time, and I'm excited to get back to the conference, but again, I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of you. So all the best. Thanks very much.